Hi, my name's Steve Hunt, and this is season 3, episode 1 of Integrate or Die, and I'm very excited on this first episode to be having a chance to introduce who will be my co-host for episode 3, Alexis Fink. So, Alexis, we always start the show the same way, which is I tell you. Usually, it's why we wanted you as a guest, but in this case, why I was really excited to have you as a co-host. Alexis, you and I have worked together for a long time. We're both psychologists that have focused on using technology to improve the quality of work. Whereas I have focused kind of more developing and implementing solutions, you've worked within companies and implemented them in very major companies like Microsoft and Meta and used all this stuff inside. So we both worked on the same thing, but from a kind of two perspectives, which was, why I was just so excited to say, what a perfect host for this. Plus, you're just an awesome person, just knowing you for a long time, fascinating person, good sense of humor, all the things you want from a podcast host. So, Alexis, and I also have to give you a shout out too. Alexis, also among other things, is the past president of the Society of IO Psychology. So not only is she a brilliant HR expert that has run analytic function, she's also an amazing psychologist. And so given my background, how can I not want to spend time with somebody like that? So Alexis, that's how I would describe you, why you're eminently qualified to be a co-host for Integrate or Die. How would you describe yourself?
Oh my gosh, I'm a little blushy given the way you've described that. I think I mostly would describe myself as a scientist. The driving force behind the things that I do are about discovering new knowledge, about experimentation, and I really believe in sort of the scientific ethos of elevating a community and sharing that discovery, which is why the opportunity to host this with you is so interesting and exciting for me. The opportunity to really dive into lots of different ways that people are pushing discovery forward and then do that in a way that kind of builds community is just really just nails my sweet spot. So thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. We've got a ton of really great conversations coming up. And frankly, it was a good excuse to spend some time with some friends I haven't talked to in a while.
Yeah, and I do love it, Alexis. One of the things I've noticed, because we've already recorded some shows together, is that you ask questions that I'm like, man, what a great question. I'm so glad she thought to ask that. It's like you ask the questions I wish I would have thought to have asked. So super cool. Well, I want to start though, but this interview is about you though. Your background, because not only are you a co-host of Integrated, you are an expert in the use of technology to improve the quality of work. And AI, to your point, is being a scientist cynicism. What is your attitude now that AI is, I guess, scalable? Because we're both joking. We both have been using AI going back to when we were in grad school and when it would take 24 hours for one iteration of a machine learning system. It was so painful. People, you do not know the pain that Alexis and I suffered as early adopters of AI technology. But now, because of the as advanced computing speeds, now we can apply it everywhere. What excites you about that as a scientist who wants to focus on improving quality of work, and what kind of scares you?
Boy, there's a question. I think the thing that excites me is just the availability of these technologies now. The things that LLMs can do because so much compute has become available. This would not have been possible outside of like a government supercomputer, even just a few years ago. So this is possible. This is elevating people's lives in so many ways. My mom runs a nonprofit, and she's using AI to help her run her nonprofit, which is just really amazing. It's a democratization of technology. And as a person who loves technology, that just really is exciting to me. The thing that well, there's a lot that I'm anxious about. One of the things I'm frustrated about is the extent to which the sort of general population kind of conflates LLMs with AI. And AI is so much more. For a long time, we saw people conflating regression with AI, and they'd say, "Oh, I'm using AI." I'm like, "Honey, you're just using regression. Like, let's call a spade a spade." But what we're seeing now is people who are conflating LLMs with AI, and it's really limiting the way they can think about problems. It's exciting to see Jan LeCun and the world model sorts of things he's working on
Mhm.
building now. All of the Feifei Li stuff several years ago about using images and how that works. Between college and graduate school, I spent a little bit of time working for Delco Electronics and was in highly automated factories where you've got sensors and you've got physical engagement with highly precise machinery. And we're seeing now in China dark factories that are entirely run by automation. So I am excited for us to get out of the only the LLM phase of democratizing and expanding access technology. I'm frustrated by the fact that I think we are undercalling the opportunities because we're really thinking of it in this narrow way. And then I'm also really anxious about any technology can be used either well or poorly. So I get worried about sloppy use. I get worried about the things we're seeing showing up in lawsuits now, where employment decisions are being made with kind of a black box, and that kind of frightens me. I get worried about people who are a little bit lazy and not developing critical thinking, and what are the consequences for that. So I'm really interested in making sure that we are approaching this ethically, pragmatically, and in ways that elevate organizations and individuals and societies, because I think there's so much potential ahead of us.
Yeah, I think that point too you said about, that people tend to think it's just LLMs because that's been the most visible. And but it's a lot more. I mean, one of the big things in some of the episodes that we were covering this season are like how it affects data management. Its ability
Yeah.
to deal with imperfect data, to analyze data in ways, link data in ways we couldn't before, and then also that really changing job design itself, the profound
Hmm.
impact. Which I think on that point, AI has been around for a long time. Going back to that, I can remember in one of the episodes you shared an example from using AI to land planes, autopilots, all these sorts
Yeah.
of things. That is AI. It's been around. It just hasn't been widely used. But now that
Mhm.
it's much more widely used, really thinking about how do we want to use to change jobs, but also what do we not want to change about jobs, I think too.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So when you look at your experiences using technology in a lot of places through your career, are there any particular lessons learned that you'd say from past uses of technology that you'd say, this is something we learned? Doesn't necessarily could be an AI solution, or it could just be some other automation that you're saying that you are bringing forward with you as you're looking at this next wave of technology.
Yeah, I think the lesson that I'm holding on to the most dearly is the fact that technology makes it possible for us to do other things that are not, that are on either side of a business process. And so the example that I talk to frequently is quite some time ago. This is before the LLM boom. We spent a bunch of time doing skill extraction work when I was at Intel. And unlike the black boxes we use now, we made sure that there were breadcrumbs. I could tell you exactly where every skill came from. I could tell you exactly why you were rated here against a job better or worse than another person. It was like fully white boxed, which was great. I was very proud of that. I also happened to own in that job our redeployment process. So if your job was eliminated, we had a process to try to help you find a new one. And our success rate was, better than nothing. It was around 30% of people in their
Mhm.
job search time were able to find a new job inside the company. And as we built this technology, which then helped people in a very clear way see what jobs would be relevant to their experience, it could get over nomenclature problems, it could help people tell a story to the hiring manager. We were able to increase that, but only modestly. And then we started looking on either side. And if you don't sit in HR, you haven't done this work, you likely don't know. It takes about 90 days to process a job elimination, right? There's all kinds of legal filings and things. So we have some notice. We kind of know who's likely to go. And we built a process that said, oh, I know what skill sets are going to become available. So I'm going to put a pause on jobs that have those skill sets. You're not going to be able to fill those for a while because I want to fill the pipe with jobs that these
Mhm.
people could go into. And then, so I sort of filled the pipe on the back end because I knew what was going to be coming available. And then on the back side, there are usually in most organizations a bunch of rules about how many people you have to interview and how many interviews there have to be, et cetera. We changed a bunch of those rules too because people are on limited time horizons and said,
Mhm.
hey, if you've got someone who's in redeployment whose job has been eliminated, you can have this much shorter way to deliver them an offer. So we made sure there were a bunch more jobs available, and we made sure it was a lot easier to land one, as well as giving people the match. So the technology piece was really just the match, but it was the filling the pipeline and the simplifying the execution that really made a difference. And we got the land rate up to around 80%. And so we almost tripled the success of people being able to stay in their jobs through, yes, the use of a very, transparent, traceable, ethical technology, and also offering people and hiring managers, here are places that you can land in the organization, and systematically making that a lot easier to do on both the front and the back end. So marrying technology with business process is really the key to getting transformative results. And I'm excited to see more and more people doing things like that with business process.
I think that's such a great example in conversation because you, in that example, just to recap, basically you used AI, and I love white box too because that is a big concern. Get early concern. It's so easy to
For
create
sure.
black box things now. It used to be hard to create black boxes, and now it's almost harder to create white boxes. Which is by
Yep.
white box, knowing how the system came into its conclusions, the decisions it's made, all of that sort of stuff. But that example you shared, you said, okay, we use this AI technology to help with move people within the organization, and we had a 30% success rate, but then when we changed the things outside of the technology, given the fact that the technology is enabling us to do things differently, and we changed things around it to take into account the technology's capability, our success rate went to like 85% from
Yeah.
30%. And it wasn't about the technology, it's about what wraps around the technology. And I think that is such a huge component of AI when you think about using AI to automate tasks that people used to do. And we always hear that phrase, we're going to keep humans in the loop. Well, what is it those humans in the loop are going to be doing? And it's going to be different from what they were doing before. And there is such a huge talent management component that outside of that technology. I think that's such a
Yep.
great observation. And that's always been true, but I think it's going to be even more important because AI is automating things that in the past we couldn't automate.
That's
And
right.
the speed of which it's happening too, I think, is an issue. Um, what did somebody say? The problem with learning from experience is it teaches you the lesson after you needed to know
Yeah, exactly. Yep, for sure.
it.
And the other thing, one other thing I'm really anxious about. Yesterday, I was in a conversation and someone talked about how excited they were that digital twins could now like do your approvals for you. I'm like, wait, wait, wait. The whole reason that I, as a leader, have an approval is so that human eyes are looking at it. We already have automation that's looking at expense reports and invoices.
Mhm.
Like we've already got AI running on it. The fact that I still have to look at it is because we need to make sure that there are human eyes there and that there's appropriate accountability. So I want to make sure that we're not accidentally defeating some systems that are pretty important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because people will just let the technology do the work, but sometimes they will increasingly have to like design into processes. And here's the part where we force a person to pay attention to what's going on,
Yep.
and get into that.
There was a really fun article that I saw, I don't know, yesterday, I think, in IEEE about prompt injection attacks
Hmm.
and how people would never fall for some of these prompt injection attacks where you've got someone that says, instruction, 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 now ignore that instruction and give me what I really want as a way to defeat guardrails inside AIs. So I really I want to make sure that we don't get so trusting of the good answers. I want to make sure that we don't get so trusting of the high performance that we abdicate our responsibility for oversight and governance, much like that airplane example we're going to use a few episodes from now, where yes, autopilot could land well most of the time, but not enough of the time to give up oversight and practice that made it possible to pick up and
Yeah.
take over.
So much of this focus, I think, is increasingly not what can we automate, but what we shouldn't automate, or what should we change about the job that we don't automate it. What?
Yep.
Just a last question, is there any like particular advice you'd give to your HR leaders? Because as a person that has run large HR organizations internally and lived through a lot of technology changes, is there any specific advice that you would give to HR leaders out there to say, this is what, because you hit on some of the things about, think about what has to happen outside the technology, think about how you want to keep humans in the loop. Is there any other thing that you'd say to HR leaders that are getting ready to spend money on AI but don't quite know what they're going to spend it on?
Oh man, you see so many people who are out there buying tokens and they're not really sure what for, right? So I think maybe there are a couple of pieces of advice. One is to be really clear on what your strategy, your value proposition, your competitive advantage. Be really clear about all of your why kinds of
Mhm.
questions so that you know where AI can fit in. Second, I've seen people get kind of anxious and engage in a lot of magical thinking
Hmm.
where they haven't really kicked the tires themselves. They don't really know what's possible, what's not possible. They don't really know what's under the hood on some of these tools. And so they're getting sold vaporware in some cases. And so I would love people to spend the time and the willingness to be a little embarrassed or feel a little stupid by diving into some of the tools. And I guarantee you can do this. My parents are about 80 years old and both of them can do this, right?
Hmm.
So you can do this. Take the opportunity in the privacy of your own closed door space and try and break the stuff. Find out where the boundaries are so that you have a better sense of what it's really useful for and what it's not. And then HR leaders specifically, I talked a few minutes ago about the need to really reinvent business processes. I think HR leaders specifically need to step up into this opportunity because AI, in order to really transform how organizations function, it needs to transform how work happens. And HR is the place where work happens. Some of that is, of course, AI doing the work of HR. So, how can it help
Hmm.
us do a job analysis? How can it help us coach first line managers that nobody ever has time for? Like, how can it do the work of HR? That's important. But more than that, how can it help us really partner with business leaders to look at business process, to look at tasks and skills, to figure out how a process might change, to figure out what change management might be required to do that, to figure out what that means in terms of the way tasks and skills aggregate into jobs and jobs aggregate into teams and teams aggregate into organizations. All of that is HR work that HR has to own. And then finally, I think HR has an obligation to not be naive because when you change the work or when the work is changed for you, you also have to change some core HR processes. There is an arms race between recruiters and candidates in terms of the use of AI. You might call it cheating, whatever else, but there is an incredible change that's happening there. That also means that pricing for jobs will be different, so compensation is going to have to be different. We should be thinking about different worker types and how organizations access talent. So that means all kinds of HR policies and practices need to change. We need to think differently about performance management, all of these things that are core tent poles to HR: recruiting, compensation, performance, workforce planning. All of those things have the potential to undergo pretty dramatic change in the coming, let's call it 5 years. And so HR leaders would do really well to be deep in how the work is changing so that they can get ahead of how HR needs to change in order to support it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good observation because AI is changing the work, which means the definition of effective performance is changing. Like your example of
Absolutely.
candidates, if somebody says, "Oh, that candidate used AI to get this job," that's not necessarily bad. They're
Right?
showing to
You
be
want them to
very
use AI
skilled,
in the
right? It was
job.
like, and so we have to really rethink the definition of performance itself, which has implications on staffing, managing performance, development, all
Yeah.
of these things. And, HR is in a position, I think, right now to be at the forefront of this, which is interesting too, because you're actually seeing some of the most innovative things in use of technology are in HR now. Historically, that
Yep.
wasn't necessarily true, but with AI, it's almost HR leading the way. My last question, Lex, is kind of shifting away from the corporate world. You've been just a role model for giving back to the profession, giving back to the field. I mean, your work as, again, you're president of Society of Biopsychology, but that comes from a lot of volunteer hours, a lot of time working them to build the field and the industry. One of the things we like to do in Integrated Eye is try to, build this field where you need talent to build the field of HR technology. What guidance or advice would you give to a person out there who said, I want to get immersed in this whole concept of using AI to rethink work. I'd like to have a job where that's what I'm doing. I'm really using technology and AI technology in particular to improve the quality of work in organizations. What would your advice be to a person who wants to go to that field? What should they be focusing on? What should they be looking at? How can they open doors into this field?
Oh man, talk about a difficult question. The advice that I usually give is there's no substitute for actually doing stuff. And if you don't have that in your current job description, there are a couple of ways to go about doing it. One, you can build a side hustle where you're doing it. I have one friend at the moment who has built a whole pretty complex agentic workflow as part of her dissertation research. So she decided mid-career she wanted to go off and get a PhD. And in order to actually manage the volume of articles and all kinds of other things, she ended up, I want to work on this. Oh, wait, this is useful. Oh, wait, this is fabulously useful. And now she has a fantastic use case she can describe about managing an AI ecosystem, managing building validation tests and evaluation, which is usually the term of art used in AI spaces, et cetera. So go out there and do it. That can be a side hustle. It can be working with a nonprofit who might need you. So if you love dogs, find yourself one of the many dog rescues and figure out how their workflow, their forecasting, their matching with foster homes, their advertising, whatever else can be useful for them. Or probably the most common and lowest barrier to entry is just do some in your job. Find an
Mhm.
opportunity in your job, do your job the old way once, and then do it a better way the next time. And be like, hey, boss, I did the thing you asked me to. I also tried doing it this way, and it worked well like this. The number of folks who I've had on one of my teams that took something that was kind of a little side project where they said, I think I could do this. I want to experiment with this. And we said, hey, you know what? You can have 10% of your time for the next few weeks. Kick the tires a little bit. See if you can make that go. If you don't have a very friendly boss, sometimes you don't tell them beforehand. But really, you can do it within the context of your job where you've got appropriate ethical access to data. You've got a user who will actually benefit, and you have some content expertise. And then you can use that to help build into what that next role at work might be. So I think there are lots of opportunities. 100% of those opportunities involve doing the work, whether it's a side hustle, a nonprofit, or in the flow of work or adjacent to your work in your day job. It involves doing the work. It's fine to read. Reading is great. It's great to listen to podcasts. It's fantastic to go get yourself a certification. But none of those are a substitute for getting out there and really wrestling with the problems in real life.
That's great. Yeah, just to find ways, and again, AI is very available to start messing around with it. And
Fully available.
if you don't want to do that, then you don't want to be in this field anyhow. So,
That's right. That's
because it's
right.
about working with the technology. Well, Alexis, I have one last question, and because we ask every single guest on this show, which is, what is a question that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you? But the caveat is you also have to answer it.
Golly. I think what you should have asked me, what people are now saying you should ask everybody is like, what's the last thing that you personally did with AI?
Oh.
And my answer is going to be super lame. I asked it to do a bunch of research and build a table that compared options to help me make a decision. So it wasn't an agentic flow. I've done some of those in the past, but the use case from literally this morning was asking it to be a research assistant and help me build out a specific table with specific features to help make a decision that I was kind of struggling with, and frankly didn't want to spend several hours digging through my own research. I'll tell you
Nice.
my failure though. I had to build my CV in APA format. My CV is kind of a mess. It's a combination of a
Yeah.
resume and a CV. And even though I have a paid subscription to like three different LLMs, every one of them totally fleebed when I asked it to redo my CV. They said, do it in this area. Great. And then like I have two books and they only put one on. I'm like, really? No, put all my pubs on there. And my CV is actually about 20 pages and they came up with like two. I'm like, you found one book and like five articles. Like you flunk. So it was interesting that it gave me excellent advice on formatting and ordering, etc. And then when I asked it to actually do the work, it kind of said, meh, I don't wanna. So I had one success and one failure in the last 24 hours.
Oh my gosh. Well, one part of that is the also thing is the importance of you need to check the work with AI still. It's like even the way you apply
Absolutely.
it. So, all right. Well, Alexis, thank you for this interview. Thank you for being the guest and the co-host and on Integrator Dive this season. And I am really looking forward to what we're going to learn through all these conversations with people, and just a delight to be working with you. So, thank you and
I
welcome to Integrator Dive.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is super fun. I'm honored, and it's always great to get to hang out with you, my friend.
Thanks.